Good evening, guys. In the last session, we discussed about HTTP protocol. What is HTTP protocol? Why we need to use HTTP protocol? What are the HTTP protocol methods available? What are the status codes available? What is HTTP request? What is HTTP response? That we understood. So HTTP protocol will act as a mediator between client and server. When client want to send a request to the server, internally HTTP protocol will be used, right? So this HTTP acting as a mediator between the client and server, and HTTP is a stateless protocol. What is the meaning of stateless protocol? It will treat every request as a new request, right? Now, in the HTTP protocol, we have the methods get, post, put, and delete. And every REST API method should be binded to HTTP protocol method. It can be get or post or put or delete, depends on your requirement. Suppose your method is responsible to send the data from server to client, then you need to bind that method to get request by using get mapping annotation. If your method is responsible to take the data from the client and insert a new record at the server, then you will bind that method to HTTP post method. To bind our method to post method, we will use the annotation called post mapping. And there is a put method. So if your method is responsible to update the data, then that method will be binded to put request. To bind our method to put request, we will go for @put mapping. So similarly, we have delete method. If you want to bind our method to delete operation, then we will use delete mapping. Get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, delete mapping, right? And when server is sending the response to the client, it will send the response along with the status codes. So status code will represent how our request processed by the server. Okay, guys. Guys, now here it will represent with the status code. It will represent with the status code. Okay, so the status code will represent how our request got processed, right? So what are the status codes available? There are multiple status codes available here: 1xx, 2xx, 3xx, 4xx, and 5xx. Got it? There are 5 different status codes are available. Here we will be seeing 2, 4, and 5. 2 represents success, 4 represents a client mistake, 5 represents a server mistake. Okay, and we discussed about HTTP request packet and HTTP response packet also. So what is that HTTP request packet? HTTP request packet will represent how the request is sent to the server, what information will be available in the request. So request will contain request line, method plus URL. Header will contain metadata, and body will contain the payload. Payload can be JSON data or XML data. When the request is processed, server will send the response back to the client. That response will contain status code plus status message. Response header will be available. Response body also will be available. Okay, guys. So with this knowledge, now I want to develop one REST API. Okay, REST API development. So here, in order to develop the REST API, Spring Boot provided web starter. Okay, so it is very simple. It is very simple to develop REST API using Spring Boot. So as we discussed, Spring Boot is one of the approach to develop Spring-based applications. So Spring Boot provided web starter to develop both web and distributed applications. Web starter will provide Tomcat as a default server. Web starter will provide Tomcat as default embedded server. For running our web application or REST API, we will be using one server. When we are developing that REST API by using Spring Boot application, web starter will provide Tomcat as a default embedded server. You no need to deploy your application to the server manually. Tomcat will be provided as an embedded server. Your application will be running in the Tomcat server. It is very simple to develop REST API using Spring Boot. Spring Boot provided WebStarter to develop both web and distributed applications. WebStarter will provide Tomcat as the default embedded server. Okay, what are the steps that we need to follow? First step, create Spring Starter project. Create Spring Starter project. Starter project is nothing but Spring Boot application we have to create here. Create Spring Starter project. That is nothing but our Spring Boot application. When we are creating the Spring Boot application, we need to add the web starter as a dependency. Create Spring Starter project with a below form starter with below dependency. So what is that dependency? We need to add Spring Boot Starter Web. Spring Boot Starter Web dependency we need to add in the pom.xml. Whenever we add the web dependency, it will download all the dependencies which are required to develop our web application or distributed application. With this web starter, we will be getting Tomcat as a default embedded server. That is the first step. And the second step, what we need to do is, second step, create REST controller class. Create REST controller class to handle request and response. Whenever client application send a request, how to handle that request, how to send the response to the client, that methods we need to handle by using REST controller. Create REST controller class using @REST controller annotation. We are going to use one annotation called @REST controller. What is the purpose of @REST controller? @REST controller annotation is used to represent our Java class as a REST controller. What is the meaning of REST controller? It will take the request, it will process the request, and it will send the response to the client. Okay. Now, after REST controller class is created, write the required methods and bind them to HTTP protocol method, HTTP protocol request. Suppose your method should send a response to the client. Then bind your method to get request by using get mapping. If it is a post method, bind it to post request. If it is a put, then bind it to put mapping. If it is a delete, bind it to delete request. Right. So create starter project with web starter dependency. Then create REST controller class using @REST controller annotation. Then write the required methods and bind them to HTTP protocol request. That is the step 3. So now let's go for step 4. In the step 4, run the boot application. Run the boot application. When we run the boot application, it will run in embedded server. It will run in the embedded server. Then step 5, test it using POSTMAN. Test our REST API, test our REST application using POSTMAN tool. POSTMAN is a free software which is used to test our REST API's functionality. Can you guys see all the 5 steps that we need to follow here? Can you guys see the 5 steps that we need to follow? Create the Spring Starter project by using below dependency. What is that dependency? Boot Starter Web dependency. Web dependency will provide all the required things to develop our web application and distributed application. I want to develop a REST API. For that, to handle our request coming to the REST API, we need to create a REST controller. Create the REST controller class using @REST controller annotation. Then write the required methods and bind them to HTTP protocol request. Then step 4, run the boot application. It will run in the embedded server. Then step 5, test our application using POSTMAN software. Are you guys clear with the steps that we need to follow? Are you guys clear with the steps that we need to follow to create a REST API? Are you guys clear with the steps that we need to follow to create a REST API? Yes. Now I'm going to my IDE. Now I am going to develop our REST API. File, new. Here I have the option called Spring Starter project. Now here I'm giving the project name as 24 REST API 1. This is our first REST API that we are creating. First REST API 1. Now, here type I am taking as Maven. Packaging you can keep as a jar or var, anything is fine. Java version 8, language Java, group ID in.ashok IT, artifact ID REST API 1. Click on next. Whenever we are clicking on this, it is asking which version of the boot you want to select. I'm going for 2.7.9 version of the boot. Here, Spring Web Dependency is available. Spring Web Dependency is available. So if you don't see that Spring Web Dependency, you can type Spring Web. Here, Spring Web Dependency is selected. Now, click on next. I have selected Web Dependency and click on finish. Right. So here, I have selected Web Dependency. That Web Dependency will provide the Tomcat server as embedded server. You no need to deploy your application in the Tomcat manually. Spring Boot will take care of that deployment. Spring Boot will take care of the deployment. Now go inside this project. Now see the pom.xml. Go inside the project and see the pom.xml. In this pom.xml, Spring Boot Starter parent is coming. Java version 1.8, Boot Starter Web Dependency, Boot Starter Test Dependency added. So I have selected Web Starter. They have given Test Starter by default. It is used for unit testing. This is used for developing web and distributed application. Web Starter is available. Okay. I created a project by adding this Web Starter. Then create the REST controller using @REST controller annotation. I need to create one Java class and I need to represent that Java class as a REST controller. In the Spring Boot by default, start class is created. This start class is the entry point for Spring Boot application execution. Now right click, new class. Now I am creating message REST controller. I'm taking the class with a name called message REST controller. I'm keeping in this in the REST package. I'm keeping this in the REST package. In.ashokit.rest is my package name. In that I'm creating a Java class. That Java class is a normal Java class now. I want to represent this Java class as a REST controller. How to represent our Java class as a REST controller? By using @REST controller annotation. @REST controller is a predefined annotation which is used to represent our Java class as a Spring Bean. Okay, guys. So let me write the annotation @REST controller. @REST controller. So with this, my Java class is represented as a REST controller. It is responsible to handle request and response. One application can send a request to my REST controller. Let me write one zero param constructor to understand how many objects are created for this REST controller. So message REST controller constructor. Message REST controller constructor. Okay. So with this, my REST controller is available. Now, how I am representing my class as a REST controller? By using this annotation, I'm representing my class as a REST controller. In this REST controller, I should write the method to handle the request and response. So people will send a message. People will send a request. Whoever is sending a request to my REST API, I want to process that request and I want to send the response to them. For that, I am writing public response entity of string. I want to send a string response to them. Public response entity of string get welcome message. Get welcome message. Now I want to prepare a message. String message body. String body. That means whatever the message I want to send. String message is equal to welcome to Ashok IT. So like this, I want to send this message. In which format? Response entity format. You can directly return the string also. No problem. You can directly return the string also. I'm using response entity as a return type of my method. Now create the response entity object, new response entity, body comma HTTP status dot OK. So OK means 200 status code. OK means 200 status code. I want to return this response from my REST controller method. Okay. Anybody who is sending a request to my welcome method, they should get welcome to Ashok IT as a response with the status code 200. How to bind this method to a request? When client application send a get request with /welcome URL, my method will send response with welcome to Ashok IT with the status code as 200. So I am creating one REST controller class. To represent this class as a REST controller, I'm using @REST controller annotation. Okay, guys. Then inside the REST controller, I'm writing one method. This method is responsible to send a message to the client. To send the message to the client, I'm using get welcome message with @get mapping. What is the purpose of @get mapping? This method is binded to a get request by using /welcome URL pattern. Now we can write a method like this also. Public string get greet message. Public string get greet message. Now what I want to say here, I want to say string message is equal to good evening. I want to say a message, string message is equal to good evening. Then I want to return that message. I want to bind this method to get request. @get mapping /greet. /welcome is available, /greet is available. If you can return directly string also. You can return directly string also, or you can return response entity also. Response entity will represent what is the body you want to send, what is the status code you want to send. If you don't set the status code, by default, this will send 200 as a status code. If you want to send some custom status code, you can take the response entity as a method return type. If you want to send a default status code as 200, then you can return string also. Are you guys able to understand two methods? These two methods are binded to get request only. One method is binded to /welcome. Second method is binded to /greet. Both are get request methods only. Both are get request methods only. Are you guys able to understand what is my REST controller and what are the methods available in the REST controller? Are you guys able to understand what is REST controller and how to write the methods for the REST controller? So here in the first method, I am sending which status code I want to send. I'm informing, I'm writing the logic to send the status code as 200. In the second method, so the first method is valid, second method is also valid. But what is the difference? In the first method, programmer telling which status code we need to send in the response. In the second method, programmer not telling which status code we need to send in the response. By default, boot will consider if this method is executed successfully, it will send a default status code as 200. If a method is failed to execute, it will send the status code as 500. If you want to send the custom status code, you can send like this. Okay. Now method level URL patterns are available. So do you want to set the class level URL pattern? If you want to set the class level URL pattern, you can do that. But I'm not writing the class level URL pattern. I'm going for method level URL pattern. Are you guys clear with my point? I'm going for method level URL pattern. So there are two methods available. Both methods are binded to get request. First method is binded to /welcome. Second method is binded to /greet. Okay, fine. I'm able to create the Spring Boot application with the web starter. And I created a REST controller by using REST controller annotation. And I'm writing the methods. I am binding the methods to HTTP request. I want to bind this method to get request. That's why I'm using get mapping. Whenever we are binding the methods to the URL pattern, every method should have unique URL pattern. So this is a /welcome. This is a /greet. Okay. Then I need to run my application and I need to test my application using POSTMAN. First, let me run my application. Right click on this project, run as boot application. Right click on the project, run as boot application. Go to the console and check it, whether my application is running or not. See, object is already created for the REST controller. Because REST controller is a Spring Bean, when the IOC container started, object will be created for the Spring Beans, which are having scope as a singleton. For my REST controller, the default scope is a singleton. So when the application is started, IOC container started, object is created for the REST controller. Now, how to test my application? You can test this application from the browser as well as from the POSTMAN. I want to test it by using POSTMAN. You need to download the Postman software, guys. You can go to Google and you can download Postman software. So let me download Postman. Postman for Windows. Okay. Postman software for Windows. Download the Postman. Postman is a tool which is used to test our REST API. So here we have a download option to download. Once you download the Postman, install it. Then you can see my Postman software. I'm opening the Postman, which is already installed in my machine. I'm opening the Postman, which is already installed in my machine. By using this Postman, I will send the request to the REST API and I will test it. Is my REST API working as expected or not? Okay, guys. So this is the Postman. By using this Postman, I want to make a request to my REST API. REST API running in my machine in the Tomcat server with the port number 8080. 8080 is the default Tomcat server port number. Am I deploying my application to Tomcat server or Spring Boot is deployed to Tomcat server? Guys, am I deploying my application to Tomcat server? Spring Boot is deploying to the Tomcat server. Spring Boot is deploying to the Tomcat. Is it Tomcat server I have installed? The Tomcat server coming with the Spring Boot? Did I install the Tomcat server? Tomcat is coming with the Spring Boot. Tomcat is coming with the Spring Boot. So is it external Tomcat? Is it embedded Tomcat? I want response from everybody. Is it external Tomcat? Is it embedded Tomcat? It is embedded Tomcat. Got my point. Now my application is running in the embedded Tomcat. What is the port number of the Tomcat? What is the port number of the Tomcat? 8080. Okay. Now go to Postman. What request I want to send for the REST controller now? Get request. Get mapping / welcome. Get mapping / greet. Now go to the Postman. Select request type. So you can send any type of request. I want to send a get request now. Select the request type as a get request. What is our URL? What is the URL of the REST API? The REST API URL is called as REST endpoint. Localhost colon 8080 / welcome. Localhost colon 8080 / welcome. So my REST API running in the same machine. That's why it is called as localhost. It is running on the port number 8080. And what is the / welcome? / welcome is my method URL pattern. Okay. So this is my request line. This is my request line. Get request URL. If you see the request line will contain method and URL. Now click on send. When I click on the send, can you see I got the response body? Welcome to Ashok IT. 200 status code with OK. 559 milliseconds it has taken to process that request. I got the response body. Body is there. Response headers also available. What are the response headers? Content type. Text plain. Plain text I got as a response. Content length 19 characters. What is the data? When I got the response. What is the keep alive, timeout, connection? These all are the response headers. What is the response body? Welcome to Ashok IT. I got as a response body. Status code is coming. Response header is coming. Response body is coming. Now, in the request what I have sent, I just mentioned my request line because body is not there for my get request. I'm not sending any header data also. Just I send the request with the method and URL. My request is sent to the server. Server processed my get request. Server send the response to me. What is there in the response? Response line, response header, response body. What is there in the response line? HTTP status code is available. HTTP status message is also available. Status code available, status message available. And we are having the body data. Response body, nothing but payload. My REST API method returned, welcome to Ashok IT as a response body. And it returned some response headers also. What headers I got? Which content I got from the server? Plain text I got from the server. What is the content length? 19 characters. When that response is processed, all those things I'm getting as a response headers. Are you guys able to understand? How I am able to test the REST API from the Postman? Are you guys able to understand how I am able to test the REST API from the Postman? See here, I'm running my application. When I run the Spring Boot application, it will run in the embedded server. I will do the testing once again, guys. Let me stop my project. I'm repeating, please observe carefully. I created the boot application by using web starter. It is a dependency that is required to create the web application using Spring Boot. And I created a Java class and I represented Java class as a REST controller. How I represented Java class as a REST controller? By using @REST controller annotation. What is the meaning of REST controller? It is used to handle HTTP request and HTTP response. In that REST controller, I am writing methods. So when client send a request, which method should process that request? I'm writing two methods. These methods should be binded to HTTP method. So these two methods in the REST controller, I am binding to get request, get mapping /welcome, get mapping /greet. Both methods are binded to get request only, but the URL patterns are different. Every method should be binded to different URL pattern. So once this REST controller is ready, no need to do any configuration, just run your application. Run as a Spring Boot application. When we run this Spring Boot application, it will run in the embedded Tomcat server. You no need to deploy your Spring Boot application to Tomcat server because Tomcat will provide its own server to run our application. That is Tomcat embedded server. Am I deploying my application to the Tomcat? Spring Boot is taking care of the deployment of the application. I want everyone to respond. Am I deploying the application? Spring Boot is taking care of the deployment. Spring Boot is taking care of the deployment. Did I install the server or I did not install the server? Guys, did I install the server? I did not install the server. I did not install the server. Okay, my application is running in the Tomcat server with the port number 8080. Now I want to test my application. Which tool we are using to test our application? Which tool we are using to test our application? Some people are not responding. Postman. Go to Postman. Download and install the Postman. Open the Postman software. In the Postman, we have option to send the HTTP request to the URL. So my REST API is up and running. I want to test my REST API by using the URL. So my REST API running in the same machine with the local host, right? So here, what type of request you want to send to the server? You select that request. What is the request type? Get request. What is the URL? Localhost :8080/welcome. So now I'm sending a request. Do I need to send any headers? Do I need to send any body? No, I am not sending any request with headers and body. Just I want to send a plain GET request. Click on send. When I send plain GET request to the server, server processed my request and executed welcome method. What that welcome method has done? Welcome method returned welcome message with the status code as 200. So here if you see status code 200 I got. Body I got as a response body, and headers. Response headers also we got. Content type, content length and all that stuff. Now do you understand how I'm able to test my REST API by using Postman? Are you able to understand how I am testing my REST API by using Postman? Yes. Similarly, can I send a request to another method? /welcome is completed. Can I send a request to another method? That is binded to /greet URL. Okay, go to Postman, localhost :8080/greet. Click on send. Now, when I send the request to that method also, now see, I got the good evening. What is the status code? 200. Am I setting the status code for the greet method? I am not setting the status code for the greet method. Guys, am I setting the status code for the greet method? Am I not setting the status code for the greet method? I'm not setting. Then who is sending the status code for the greet method? Spring Boot will prepare that status code and send the response to the client. So here If you don't set it, by default, Spring Boot will take that and will set it. If you want to set the custom status codes, you can set that by using response entity. Response entity is an object which is used to represent response body and the status code that we want to send to the client from our REST method. Response entity is a class which is used to set response body and response status code to the client. Are you clear? Are you clear with my method? So here, taking the response entity as a return type is mandatory, or taking the response entity as a return type is optional. Taking the response entity is mandatory, or taking the response entity is optional. It is optional. Taking the response entity is optional. When we need to take the response entity as a return type, guys, do you have idea? When should we take the response entity as a return type? When should we take response entity as a return type? If you want to set the custom status code, then you need to take response entity as a return type. So if you don't take the response entity, what is the default status code it is sending? What is the default status code it is sending? 200. Okay, good. So now do you understand how to send a request and how to see the response in the Postman? How to send the request and how to send the response in the Postman? Are you able to see that? Yep. Any doubts, anybody in this process now? Developing our first REST API? Anybody having any doubt in the first REST API? All good? All good. Now, let us see. Here, I want to create one more REST controller, guys. New class. I'm creating customer class first. I'm creating one binding class. I'm creating one binding class called customer class. In this class, I will specify private string customer name, private string email, and private string gender. So I'm taking 3 variables in the customer class. Let me write some setters and getters for these variables. And let me take the setters and getters for these variables. This is my Java class. Now, I'm going to create another REST controller in the class. New class. I'm taking the class with a name called customer REST controller. So do you know how to represent this Java class as a REST controller now? Can you please respond in the chat? How to represent the Java class as a REST controller? Which annotation I need to use to represent Java class as REST controller? @REST controller. I'm writing one annotation @REST controller. With this, my Java class is represented as a REST controller. Now I want to write one method, public customer get customer. I'm writing a method. That method is having customer object as a return type. So as of now, I'm setting some dummy data to the customer object. Customer C is equal to new customer. C dot set customer name, some John, and C dot set customer email, john@gmail.com, and C dot set gender as male. I'm setting the data and I'm returning customer object. I'm returning the customer object. This method, I want to bind it to get request. To bind this method to get request, I'm going for get mapping /customer. Okay. Now, can you tell me what is the return type of my method? Can you tell me what is the return type of my method, guys? My method is returning object. Now, when other application is sending a request, should I send the object as a response? I should not send the object as a response. I should send the object as a response to the client application. I should not send the object as a response to the client application. We should not send the object as a response to the client application. Do you know what is the problem if I am sending object in the response? What problem we will face if we send object in the response? Interoperability problem. My application is Java. So do you think that client application also always is Java? My application is a Java based application. My application will understand the Java object. What about the client application? Client application may be Java, may not be Java. If a client application is not Java, they don't know what is a Java object. So my application should send object as a response. My application should not send object as a response. My application should not send object as a response. Are you clear with my point? Now I'm going to send request to the customer. Customer REST controller is available. In that REST controller, there is a method available. That method is binded to /customer URL. Now, can you tell me if I send a GET request to the /customer from the postman, what response I will get? Can you guys guess it and can you guys tell me that? I will send a GET request to the /customer method. What I will get as a response? What is my method returning? What is my method is returning? Object. Okay. Can we send that and can we see what will happen? Can we send a request and can we see what response we will get? How I need to send a request now? Guys, how I need to send a request now? Postman. Go to Postman, clear my project console, stop the server, run this application again, run as the boot application, I created two things, guys. One is I created a customer.java. It is a normal Java class with some variables. Those variables are having setter methods and getter methods. And I created one more REST controller. In that REST controller, I have a method. That method is binded to get mapping with the /customer URL pattern. Okay, go to Postman, get request, localhost :8080 /customer. All of you, please observe carefully. I am making a get request to my REST controller. That method is binded to get request with the /customer URL. That method is returning customer object. From the Postman, I'm sending a request to that method. Click on send. Wow. Did I get the object as a response? I got the JSON as a response. Am I getting the object as a response? Am I getting the JSON as a response? Beauty. JSON we got as a response. So now tell me, do I really need to write the code of the Jackson API to convert the Java object to JSON? It will be taken care by Spring Boot. It will be taken care by Spring Boot, or I need to do that? Converting the Java object to JSON is not only my project requirement, guys. Every REST API requirement is that. That is a universal requirement. When your method is returning an object, if your method is a REST controller method, if it is returning an object, Spring Boot will understand that. So this method returning the objects are not used in the REST API development. So let's convert this object to the JSON format and send that JSON to the response. JSON as a response. 200 status code. Go to headers. Now you see what is the response header, content type, application JSON data, server sent it. Server is sending the response header and response body. In the response header, they mentioned response type, application JSON. And the response body, they send customer data in the JSON format. They send customer data as a JSON format. So now we understood how to convert Java object to JSON by using Jackson API. Do I need to write that logic, or that logic will execute internally in the Spring Boot? Do I need to write that logic, or that logic will be executed by Spring Boot internally? That logic will be executed by Spring Boot internally. Are you guys clear with my point? Now, suppose I am a client, I'm sending a request to the REST API. By default, I'm getting JSON as a response. I don't want JSON. I want XML as a response. I don't want JSON. I want XML as a response. Can Spring Boot support for XML response? Can Spring Boot support for XML response? Yes, they will support for XML. They will support for JSON also. My Spring Boot application will support for XML. My Spring Boot application will support for JSON also. Okay, how to deal with that XML data and JSON data, how to take only XML response, how to take only JSON response, how to send XML as the input, how to send JSON as the input, that I will explain in the next session. First of all, I want you to practice how to create the REST API, how to write the REST API methods, how to test that REST API by using POSTMAN. Okay, for time being, create one object and return that object. By default, it will return JSON as a response. In the next session, we will understand how to deal with XML data as well as JSON data. Are you clear with my point? Now, do you understand how to, this is our first REST application, guys. So there are so many concepts that we need to understand. So this is our first REST API that we have developed. Are you clear? I want everybody should complete first REST API development, install the POSTMAN, and test our application from the POSTMAN. If anybody having questions on this, you can ask me. Guys, tomorrow is Ugadi festival. We don't have class tomorrow. We have the next class on the Thursday. Okay. In the next class, in the Thursday, we will understand how to deal with XML data as well as JSON data. Okay. You can unmute your mic and you can ask your questions.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Hello.
Instead of a response entity class, we can use the annotation like response status something @ response status like.
Yeah, that is a different story, sir. We will discuss that. If you want to combine both response body and response status code, we will go for response entity class. Class is different, annotation is different.
Okay, sir.
Hello,
will
sir.
you explain, sir, later?
Yeah, I will do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, sir. Sir, you said that response entity is the class also and it is the object also.
Yes.
So
new class name. What is the meaning of new class name?
It will the object.
Yeah, I'm creating the object and I'm returning that object because my method return type is response entity type. This object constructor, this is a constructor, right? Parameter is a constructor. For that constructor, I'm passing two parameters. One is response body. What data we want to send in the response body? What is the status code you want to send in the response? I'm combining those two things and I'm creating the response entity object. That response entity object I'm returning from there.
Means annotation base is different and class is different.
Right.
Sir, why this response entity it is not showing in the JSON format in response?
No, here we are returning a text message, right? How you will represent the text message in the JSON format? You cannot do that. Okay. So it is a plain text message. Here I'm returning an object. Object data is having variables. That variable data converted to JSON. When you are returning a text message, the text message cannot be represented in the JSON or XML. If you have an object, that object can be represented in the JSON format or XML format. Text message, you will not do that. It is a plain text. It is a plain text.
Sir, can you please change the code and show the error status code?
If you want to send here, you can send the different status codes also, right? No content, something like this. Okay. So when I send the response with the no content, what is the meaning of no content? What is the status code it will represent? 204. Okay means 200. You can run this application. Run this application and send the request to /welcome. What is the status code I'm sending now?
204.
204. Now 8080/welcome. Send the request. What is the status code we are getting?
Yeah, 204.
Like this, we can do that.
Sir, normally we used to get trace, right? If there is any error.
That exception handling, we will do it. So today is not the last class. Today is the first class.
Okay.
Why this angular bracket is used also?
This angular bracket will represent a type safety, generic, sir. Here we are specifying the string, right? It is a generic type.
Fine, fine.
Hello, sir. In Postman, there are so many HTTP method, and I'm discussing only for the 4 method.
Yes,
What
in the
is
REST
use
API,
of this,
in the REST API development, we will be using the 4 methods. So what is the purpose of remaining methods that I will explain later?
Okay, sir.
Okay. Right. Any other questions, anyone?
Sir, response line where we can see in the Postman.
Response line means the status code that you are seeing here, right? This one you can consider as a response line. Status code and status message will be available in the response in the Postman. Body, it will display by default. If you want a headers, you can select the headers. What are the headers we are getting in the response from the server? Those response headers we can see. The content type will represent in which format you received the response from the server. What is the body that you got in the response? You can see in that body. This is the response structure that you can see.
Okay.
So this is the diagram that we discussed yesterday. Request packet and response packet.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
We can also send the same request in URL, right? Browser.
Yes, we can send that. If it is a GET request, you can send the same request in the browser also. If it is a POST request, we can't send from the browser. We have to send only from the POSTMAN. GET request, we can send from the browser also directly. So any request that you are sending from the browser, by default, it will be a GET request only. If it is a GET, you can send it from the POSTMAN, from the browser also. But the thing is, whenever you send a request from the browser, in the browser, you can't see the response header, response status code and all. Browser will give you only response body directly. So if you send the request, localhost :8080/welcome, /greet, whatever it is. Now you will see only response. You can't see the status code. You can't see the status message. You can't see the response headers. It will show you only the body. So whenever we are testing the REST API, always we need to use the Postman so that you will understand clearly what response it is giving for you.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
Very good evening.
Actually, instead of using the customer object as a method return type, what we should have to prefer for that?
We will use objects only to represent the input. Method parameters and method return types will represent object only, because in the Java, everything will represent in the form of object. This is the right approach to write it.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, once call the customer from web browser, it is get mapping, right? So
yes,
once...
you can call it, man. If you call it, you will get the JSON data.
Okay. Here also JSON data is coming.
Yes.
Sir, Spring we can use both XML and annotation approach, but Spring Boot
Yes.
will support only annotation. Sir, why to use in
Sir,
XML, sir?
No. You are totally confused, man. Spring Boot configurations will not be there in the XML. I'm not talking about the configurations. I'm talking about the response in the XML format, not boot application with XML.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So, sir, in real life, it would be there would be one client and server. Here we are just for sake of testing and working. We are taking it like we are giving the value of like we have mapped particularly the URL with the request and response. Correct?
Yes, sir. So see here, first we will understand the REST API development. Then we will go for client development, another application. One application, another application connection we will do by using these two concepts. You will get to know those things. Give me another 1 week of time. You will understand that part as well.
Okay, understood, sir.
Hello, sir.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, give me one real-time example of REST API.
What are you doing from the last classes, madam? How many real examples I have given on the REST API? What you attended in the what you have learnt in the last 4 or 5 classes on the REST API? You did not attend or you have attended?
I did not attend, sir.
Please go through the backup videos and class notes.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, sir.
Sir,
Yep.
Sir, where we are using the GraphQL?
That's different, sir. We'll talk about that later. That is used to fetch the data. Okay.
Sir, as of now, we use URL. So how URL is differentiate with the UR and URI?
like in the
We'll come to that, sir. This is URI / welcome is called as URI. This complete one is called as URL. URL and URI, we will differentiate that. Okay. Good. Good. Thank you. With this, I'm stopping for today. We'll meet again in the Thursday session. Before coming to Thursday, please complete the first REST API development that we have done today. In the next session, we will understand how to deal with XML data as well as JSON data for request and response. Thank you. Advance happy Ugadi.